Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the mini game podcast. Today is Friday, August 22nd. Starting almost exactly when I said I was going to start, maybe 5-6 minutes late. There's been these posts about a Windows update. It's like KB, a bunch of numbers, and then I think it ends something like 3878 or something like that. Regardless, this newest update seems to be breaking SSD type hard drives, just like corrupting data. And so yeah, the Windows updates, which are automatically applied, are now getting worse and worse and actually dangerous, on top of just being annoying and forcing people into Windows 11. So there's a way to go to Windows Update and click the advanced options and then click pause and then pick the furthest date away from the current date, which is about 5 weeks. And so that is the recommendation to everybody. And I'd seen that story several times and just kind of been ignoring it because I just don't want to even think about Windows. Boy, would I really like to be on Linux and just have my Bazzite Linux computer built and set up and just everything working perfectly there. It's asking too much to expect everything to work perfectly, but man, certainly there is less of a chance of that kind of nonsense happening. And I can't help but think that a significant reason why these kinds of updates are happening now and when they really have not happened in the past. I cannot think of another time in which a Windows update was pushed out and it was just completely breaking hardware. Although it probably has happened a couple of times in the past. But I can't help but feel like that the speed is accelerating because the brain drain at Microsoft is accelerating as they're laying off more and more senior people and trying to replace them with AI and forcing everybody to use AI. The actual talent and intelligence there seems to be going away. Definitely there's a less of an emphasis at Microsoft to make a good product versus just forcing products onto customers who don't want them. So yeah, I went in there and paused my Windows updates, which is going to present a separate problem as far as security updates not being added. But I'll unpause it as soon as I see anybody say it's now safe to unpause it. But right now, Microsoft has, I think, done nothing. I don't think they pulled the pushing out of this latest update that is corrupting SSDs. Nor have they thought of any kind of plan to warn people. Otherwise, I've been feeling pretty good here. We'll be scrolling down the 24-hour peak chart on SteamDB as far as peak concurrent player base in the last 24 hours to see what people are playing. Yeah, you know, for someone who doesn't really speak any other languages fluently, I am pretty terrible about using the right words in English also. Although, in fairness to myself, the English language is a mess, and it is not particularly well consistent and designed. But yeah, I've been feeling better lately, coughing a lot less, definitely not having a deep, lungs full of congestion cough that I've been having. And I half wonder if it isn't just because it's rained a little bit outside, and that outside my house is just surrounded by allergens. That there is just a ton of allergy. They try to make these new houses, or some houses, if you're going to get a certain energy certificate just completely airtight and have a heat air exchanger connected to the air conditioner, so it brings in fresh air and blows out the bad air in the house from one very specific spot and not through a bunch of cracks in the walls and such. But I kind of would like to see if there was a way to retrofit that into existing houses, and that you could have everything still in the house, like furniture and stuff, and then blow some kind of insulation in that would fill all the cracks in the windows and doors. I just don't see how that would happen correctly. It'd almost have to be a two-part epoxy type thing, where you would put some kind of UV light box on the outside of a window and then have some kind of quick breaking down aerosolized UV that you could blow in the air through the cracks. And so it would just like coat an entire window, just as a box on one side, on the inside of the window, blowing in this UV activated glue, for lack of a better term, and it would just coat everything on the window, and then eventually it would just evaporate and break down and turn into water. And then on the other side, on the outside of the window, you'd have a light box of UV lamps activating the glue, which that probably wouldn't work because it would probably just create this sticky mess on everything. It'd almost have to be water itself. The Greeks had this thing in their concrete where they figured out a way to add a bunch of extra stuff, and so anytime the concrete would crack, water would get in it and it would activate the remaining chemicals in the concrete and create a reaction to create a new kind of concrete in between, so it would like self-heal, almost like a scab healing over. Maybe there would be something like that you could do. Maybe you could spray the outside of the house with tiny particles, but inherently an old house is just not going to be built to be airtight. But yeah, I guess if you could spray the outside of a house with tiny particles and then have the moisture inside of a house just slowly blow outward and solidify it. Although it'd probably just be easier to build like a house around a house, really, for old houses. Just build a greenhouse, put a bunch of glass panels around it, and that's what I've seen some of the really old buildings do. Anyways, that has nothing to do with video games, but you can see my I'm relatively just woke up and my mind is wandering already. But yeah, I've been feeling a little bit better, but that really has just left me enough time and energy to catch up on things that I have not been really doing enough of, as far as laundry and dishes. So I haven't really accomplished too much. Still playing PC Building Simulator, just about at level 28, I believe, which I imagine is just going to push me to 29, which I imagine is just going to push me to level 30. I screwed up one of the bespoke storyline quests. There are two kinds of quests in PC Building Simulator in career mode. One is kind of a procedurally generated thing that I think was probably generated by procedure once and then just gets cycled. So you'll see it once between level 1 and 25, and then eventually you'll see it again somewhere after level 25, and then eventually you'll see it again, and then eventually you'll see it again. And then there are more artistically created bespoke storyline quests that have like an actual narrative in the emails you get for jobs, and it's a continuing narrative, and it's definitely more thought out. Well, all of those up until this point have been fairly easy for me, who has a lot of skill building computers anyways. So I've not had any problems. But then one quest came in, and it really is the kind of quest that should have had a lot more establishing support quests around it, where very early in the game you would have had more of the procedurally generated quests like it. But this quest is parodying that story of the crazy guy who built the submarine, and then the rich people went in the submarine and got it imploded, and those rich people died. It's basically parodying that. So you're building computers for that company. Well, the first thing they do in that quest is they give you a ridiculously small amount of budget to do things. And that is just how the first two quests in that storyline goes. You just have these really, really tight budgets. Every other quest in the game, and I'm getting this quest line at level 27, 60 plus hours into the game. Every other quest up until that point has given you either $10 more of what you need if you really are just supposed to be replacing like a power supply with the exact same model of the power supply. They'll give you $200 and the power supply will cost $190. Or if you're being told to upgrade a computer and not just repair something, diagnose and fix. Those are the two quest types: diagnose and fix, and upgrades, and build a new PC. I guess it's a third type, which there's many subtypes under build a new PC, as far as whether you're going to use water cooling or an all-in-one cooler or something like that. But anyways, yeah. Every other quest usually gives you way too much money, where this one gives you barely enough. And so I got in that quest line, and I finally figured out how to stay within budget and reach the high demands that the job required. And it took me too long, so I missed the delivery date. And when you miss the delivery date, which I'd never done before, you just have to return the PC to them. Like, you can't finish the job, and you can't decline the job. You are just admitting defeat and quitting, and you are going to get a 1-star in your Yelp like review of your company. Furthermore, I experimented with it. You cannot strip their computer in a hugely unethical way and send them back a computer case with nothing in it, without also paying the difference there. It tracks the value of the computer when it comes in to the shop, and you have to give them back a computer of the same value or higher. And if you give them a computer of a value of higher, you're probably still only going to get 1-star review. So for PC Building Simulator, that's probably about the third or fourth time I've had a 1-star review. The other times are just me being stupid and not paying attention, me using used parts when almost every job says don't use used parts, or me not using a gigabyte graphics card when they ask for a gigabyte graphics card, or me not running a virus scan when they cryptically hint in the email that you need to do a virus scan, or me not running a stability check once after overclocking. But I've done over 500 jobs now in PC Building Simulator, and really there's only been 2 that have just been total disasters and failures, and most have just been little goof ups. There's some irritating things, certainly about the demands of the clients, as would be realistic to reality, in that you'll get people asking for liquid cooling in their computer, and then they will send you a completely clogged to the gills full of dust computer and want you to dust it. And yeah, that just doesn't make any sense to me, that I would want to really hand a printout that would be passive aggressive saying proper PC care and maintenance is absolutely necessary with liquid cooling, because the radiator fins are going to be even smaller than the radiator fins on an air cooling CPU cooler. Radiator fins on a liquid radiator are going to be smaller, and so they're going to be even more susceptible to dust. Yep. And then you get a lot of people who want cable modding, as far as they want all the cords to be a certain color on the inside of their computer, and it's kind of irritating when somebody brings in a computer and it already has one color of cable modding and they are paying you a decent amount of money in labor to just replace cords. But I personally am not a fan of unplugging and replugging in cords that don't need to be unplugged and replugged, since the connectors inside the motherboards are not really designed like USB plugs to be unplugged and plugged hundreds of thousands of times before breaking. I don't know how many plugs versus unplugs a USB-C has, but I know it is way more than any of the internal wires and connectors. SATA connectors for hard drives are pretty much awful, in that I think they're designed to be plugged in maybe a dozen times or so before they start to get loose or break completely. There's a lot of room for improvement as far as the internal connectors on motherboards. Anyways, it would make a lot of sense for them to just go to USB-C connectors of some sort internally for everything. But that would be kind of weird, to say the least. But yeah, it would make a lot of sense too. It might. It more than likely wouldn't be a protocol change where hard drives all of a sudden are going to start connecting over a USB-C signal, but it would be just like the wiring is the same and any loose USB-C cable would automatically work. There'd be something that would look like a USB-C port and, well, be a USB-C port, and it would just be labeled as hard drive, and then there would be something, a USB port on the back of a hard drive. You just plug it in. But yeah, that'd be also kind of weird for fans to have USB-C connectors, but not a terrible thought. Then you would just wire up power, probably. And then front panel connectors. No standard was ever made for the front panel connectors. Yeah. And it probably would be more of a thing where the edges of motherboards would be drilled out so you could stick a USB-C cord right on the edge of a motherboard, and there really wouldn't be a connector at all. They try to make it as cheap as possible like that. It would be more like the slots that you plug graphics cards into. Although more than likely they probably would just create a new standard and new connector anyways. But any new standard and new connector is almost certainly going to be reversible like USB-C. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be the way of the future. It's just way too popular otherwise. Yeah. Let's see, do I have anything else? I'm trying to think of things to even talk about from warming up. Gamescom is still going on, but only that opening night really had, I think, the biggest of announcements happening. So I expect we'll have a little bit more news from Gamescom, but probably not too much. I know Silksong has a release date now, and we'll talk about that later with the exact date when that story pops up. And I don't think it's too far away. I think it's somewhere around like September 3rd, and today is August 22nd. Still playing Memento Mori, still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, still playing some kind of Madoka Magica, but that's not this one. This Android only game released in Japan was released what year? 8 years ago? So that might be why the more recent Magical Madoka game exists, is that they did something 8 years ago and then they want to continue forward or rehash that content. It kind of make me feel better about the current Magical Madoka game if it turned out that like all that story and a lot of the cutscenes were made for a previous version and they're just being re-released. See, related eBay stuff is not gonna help me though. I don't have any screenshots. It's kind of hard to tell. Yeah. This looks like this is probably more of a team. Well, I mean, it really wouldn't be too different from what the current game does, no matter what they did, because it would always be teams fighting each other. But this does look like a different art style somewhat. Yeah, and this storyline here looks exactly like what is presented in the story cutscenes. So yeah, maybe it is just a case that they took the storyline from the previous game and rehashed it into a new version of the game, which would then allow for them to resell things. Interesting. So that makes me wonder how many games could be like that on Android in particular. Probably there aren't too many of those. We know that there is plans, I will kind of believe it when I see it, but there's plans to relaunch my favorite mobile game, Destiny's Child, no relation to the singing group. So that would be a game getting taken down and then waiting a few years and relaunching. Is that really the cycle we're going to start seeing for these kinds of gacha games and these kinds of mobile games, in that they go for 3 years and that gets people interested. Then they go into hibernation for potentially 8 years in total, so 5 more years or longer. And then they come out of hibernation seeking a whole new generation of, let's face it, they're probably targeting kids, but even if they weren't, if you were 20 playing the Magical Modica game 8 years ago, you'd be nearly 30 when this Magical Modica game came out, so you'd either be nostalgic for it or have grown out of it. I tried to talk about a movie, I think, in the last stream, and I couldn't remember the name of it. The name of the movie is Sneakers. It is actually on sale right now as a 4K UHD for like $18, which is not really a bad price for a 4K UHD. The question is, do I really need the movie Sneakers? I don't think I've sat through it more than once in my life, and I kind of need to watch it streaming. I am weirdly leaning towards this idea that I'm going to watch things on streaming first, and then if I like it, I'm going to buy it on 4K UHD. But also, I'm frankly too broke to be buying 4K UHDs anyways. Yeah. But yeah. Sneakers is kind of like the more serious take on something like Hackers, as far as the movie goes. More of a drama, more of an adult movie. Speaking of streaming, I finished watching the third of the new animes. They're clearly, the way Hulu is getting these animes is by either groupings or by seasons. And if there really was like 3 different shows in the same season where it's a girl is isekai'd and reincarnated as the villainist in a otome visual novel game, that is a lot. But I finished watching the third one of this one, and the third one was much more serious, but also, once again, Hulu gets me, tricks me by convincing me to watch something that doesn't have an ending. Season 1 ends, it's fine, but it leaves a lot open. And in fact, I would say that this one in particular is the worst of the endings of the 3, because it really doesn't address anything at all. The other 2 have time jumps where the female protagonist who has been reincarnated as a villainess jumps to being an older lady and hitting that pinnacle and that peak of conflict, where this one ends with her still being fairly young and just slowly growing up. So it doesn't really have that much of a time jump, although I think it does have some of a time jump, and it feels like I must have not paid attention to an entire episode because I missed, it feels like I missed something, or they skipped an important event in the anime. So yeah, I guess I'm back to watching Ranma 1/2 at this point, as far as watching streaming shows go. It was a fine show, but it will be a much better show if it gets a second season and gets a proper wrap up and doesn't just end on a cliffhanger. There are a few mangas that came out decades ago, basically, like Berserk, as far as a manga, is going to have a new chapter coming out, they're saying, which, yeah, a lot of the makers of those mangas are probably on the verge of death, so that they have taken way too long. And that's always been a thing about manga to anime translations is that unless the manga was very well finished and completed, most anime shows had to make up their own ending. Full Metal Alchemist is perhaps a great example of that. The first Full Metal Alchemist anime completely makes up their own ending for that anime, and then the manga goes in a different direction and I think fully finished. And so then the second Full Metal Alchemist series is much closer to the manga, I would assume. But yeah, I really do want endings as much as I can get endings, or at least something close to an ending. And yeah, there's nothing else I'm really that interested in seeing. I'd like to see the new Saw movie, Saw 10, but I don't think that's going to be on streaming on any streaming service I have. Plus, yes, I should be doing other things. Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm running out of things to say, so we really need to jump into the news fairly quickly. I probably have just been sleeping a bunch. I wanted to open up ATI because I wanted to just see if ATI still exists. Okay, so yeah, ATI used to be your de facto choice for video cards before NVIDIA showed up. So 1985, they were what you would go with. There was a little bit of Intel graphics cards competition, and then there was GeForce competition too, and NVIDIA competition later. But if you wanted decent graphics, you probably were going ATI for a while, and particularly they had cards that had like RCA in, or even coaxial cable in. I had a TV tuner ATI card, which got very sparky because the grounding for my cable was not done right at my house. So yeah. So yeah, there was definitely some weirdness there. I'm surprised it didn't break the entire computer. But yeah, in 2006, so about 20 years ago though, it was acquired by AMD, and then 4 years later, in 2010, the ATI branding was retired completely, and it was effectively replaced with AMD Radeon graphics card lineup. Although it's questionable if that was all the same people, or if maybe they just acquired the name and lost a lot of those people. But yeah. And AMD cards, Radeons, never have had as much prestige as ATI once had, I would say. And only the fact that SteamOS potentially will run better on an AMD graphics card is there a reason to buy an AMD graphics card. Otherwise, I think you're kind of good at getting like a 4070, 4080 right now, if you can afford it. As far as a GeForce card, you might even be good going with something like a 2080 Ti, which is about as far as I think I'm going to be able to go in PC Building Simulator. I'm surprised they're even unlocking 2080s. I thought they were going to stop at 1080 Ti's. But there's an argument to still be using 1080 Ti's. Now, is that going to get you 4K at 144 hertz? No, but it might very well work well if you're playing older games, and if you're not really pushing the resolution beyond 1080p and not trying to get a frame rate beyond 60 frames per second. Yep, and I already said it, but I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. Nothing really interesting happening there. Still playing Memento Mori. Nothing really interesting happening there. They've got a new character. And still trying to wrap up my interest, if I can, with Madoka Magica, Magi, etc. Which, if I could just see all the story and feel satisfied seeing all the story, I could see getting away from playing that game. And I definitely need to decide to stop playing something. And Pokemon TCG Pocket is another one, certainly, to think about. When we look at the PC video card breakdown here for July, you can see how NVIDIA still is very much dominating graphics cards, because people aren't just going to immediately abandon the graphics cards they already have. And yeah, it's not like AMD is in a lot of laptops. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see AMD with Strix Halo architecture start to show up in a lot more laptops. But you gotta go out of your way to buy any kind of OEM equipment, whether it's a pre-built PC, OEM PC from Dell or Alienware, or it's a laptop from somebody like HP or something. That's another OEM company. But yeah, you gotta go out of your way to say, give me AMD graphics cards. Even if you are getting an AMD Threadripper processor, which you can see that split for people who install and play Steam is getting very close to 50-50, and it is definitely Intel that's declining. Meanwhile, Intel is also saying that they are about to completely drop the ball, and probably are going to try and split up the company and just sell it in smaller pieces, at which point I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see several years of AMD only CPUs. And if you have AMD only CPUs, you're inevitably going to see AMD only builds that have AMD GPUs too. Like, I really wouldn't mix a AMD CPU and an NVIDIA graphics card unless I absolutely was just having to stay on Windows. And even then, I'm not sure I would want to make that mix. Well, although I guess I am doing that mix right now. I have an AMD CPU and an NVIDIA graphics card right now on my current computer. Alright. My gesture's not going to work today, apparently. So I wanted to talk about my awful chart here, which at this point I've given up on even trying to fix it, because I definitely think it's just going to be like 4 more months and then I'm going to give up on this chart completely. But something did occur to me to this chart. Like, the whole point of this chart was to get a longer scale perspective on what games people were playing and what games possibly were talking about, and then end of the year wrap up, and just to say, here is what people were excited about in 2025. At some point it changed from being 52 weeks to 26 weeks just because of some problem that I had to fix with it being sampled every time I stream, which would be three times a week. But this chart is glacial. It just doesn't change at all. And very noticeably, Battlefield 6 is not going to be on this chart at all. Battlefield 6 beta. But Battlefield 6 beta has definitely been a prominent event that has happened this year in gaming. In fact, I would say it's probably the most impactful event in gaming that has happened, and it just won't be reflected in this chart because people weren't really playing the Battlefield 6 beta long enough. And so every year using this chart, I would end up just talking about Counter-Strike 2 and PUBG and Dota and Marvel Rivals, which Marvel Rivals, the only story you can say at the end of this year is likely going to be the story of how Marvel Rivals just failed to keep people's attention long enough. But yeah. And I think Banana may finally have fallen off the SteamDB chart as a clicker game. So yeah, that's a long way of saying that my chart is pretty useless. It says I played for 401 hours now. And I have this achievement where you've completed 500 jobs. 1.8% of players have achieved that. But there's also achievements for like having $1 million, and I just don't see how you could have $1 million in the game. Not without cheating. And like there's literally no strategy I can find in the game to make money. Like, you get a job, you buy the components for the job, you sell the components for the exact same price you buy them. The only money you get is from labor costs. If you use used parts, you sell the used parts at the price that you basically got the used parts for. If you try to sell the games, sell pre-built PCs on eBay, it seems to sell it for just about the same amount that you spend to build the PC. Yeah. So even having $100,000 in the bank seems like it would be impossible. And there must be some kind of strategy, but I just don't see what it is. But I've clearly missed it, since more players have gotten to this point of having $1 million in the bank than have gotten to level 30. I'm still waiting for the game to let me buy 100% of the company, and I was thinking maybe owning 100% of the company might increase the amount of money you get per job. But even if it did increase the amount of money you get per job, it would have to be a significant increase for you to get up to $1 million. I feel like you should really just win the lottery or something after a year of in-game time. Yeah, and some of these other things, like Hoarder, you only really are going to get if you go out of your way to have $1 million. PC Building Simulator is one of these games that in particular suffers a lot more for people who play it outside of its launch window. That I imagine updates were added bit by bit, month by month, and so people would have played PC Building Simulator for maybe 20 or 30 hours when it first came out, and then had to wait a month for more new content, and then jumped back into it and played it a little bit more. And it definitely feels like it's also a streamer type game where streamers would play it for hours and hours and hours. I'm not expecting too much as far as games on sale on Steam at the moment. Valve acquired the company that made Firewatch, which also means they acquired the person who put DMCA strikes against a YouTuber who played Firewatch, which led to Firewatch being blacklisted by me. And there's really no reason to change that blacklist at this point and get the game or play the game, which is kind of a shame because there was definitely a peak point there where the really good walking simulators, which I don't know if I really would include Firewatch as being one of the really good Firewatch walking simulators, would have caught my attention. Whereas now I've played enough walking simulators to feel like I have had my fill for perhaps a lifetime. Yeah. See if the Steam Deck is on sale in a second here. The kid I gave a Steam Deck to is in school now. I said this last stream, but yeah. Seems to be shifted into a different mode as far as things go. So yeah. On one hand, maybe I should buy it just because I want to buy it, but on the other hand, there's just so many other games. Yeah. But, guess I'm gonna put this as an ignore title. Now, this was released in 2016. I guess at some point Panic became a publisher. Did Campo Santo get sold out from Valve? But yeah, the thought here is that Valve hired the person. Maybe they only hired the person. And see, this game has a release date of 2029, 3 years from now. Ridiculous. Or 4 years from now. I'm starting to forget whether we're in 2025 and starting to think I'm in 2026 a little prematurely. But yeah. The point I was going to make there, though, is it does seem like Valve hiring people who worked on Firewatch, hiring the wrong person, in my opinion, who worked on Firewatch, or acquiring Firewatch in general, does show just what happens when you get acquired by Valve, which is to say nothing happens. They consume talent, and then it gets integrated into a company that then produces very little. And the assumption there is a lot of talent either eventually gets other jobs or leaves the industry completely, or they end up just working on the Steam storefront or answering customer support emails, things that most people would think were beneath them. And it might be a very cushy life that pays well, but it doesn't build up your resume, and it doesn't let you be artistically fulfilled, per se. But that is also kind of the old way of thinking of Valve. We've seen newer things happen at Valve lately, as far as Deadlock being in development and a Steam Deck being developed. Here we can see there are no refurbs of the Steam Deck, and with the rumors of Fremont, it is one day further down the path of hitting a point where it becomes harder and harder to recommend a Steam Deck, particularly if you don't need that handheld compatibility. Yeah, Peak put out an update note with their latest update saying, enjoy this new update until Silk Song comes out, which is kind of cheeky, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot of hype, it looks like, around Hollow Knight Silk Song. I question whether the game will live up to that hype, but also I didn't really play the first Hollow Knight, so I have no idea. We can see the variety of games being played on the Steam Deck is still changing quite a bit. It's not just that the Steam Deck is locking down to a few games that people are playing. It's not just that people play Baleotro and the Steam Deck is the Baleotro machine. New games come in and new games show up on the chart very frequently. Alright. So that's going to bring us to the Video Game Chronicles stories, but I am going to say I immediately see that there's probably a problem here because I have only one story open at all, so we'll see what happened here. Metroid Prime 4 has been rated by the ESRB. This is the latest major ratings board to cover the game. I wonder if Metroid Prime 4 was supposed to come out a little bit earlier. Well, let's be honest, Metroid Prime 4 was supposed to come out years ago on the Switch 1. They went the entire generation of the Switch 1 trying to make a new Metroid game, perhaps not in earnest, always really trying that hard. But yeah, it certainly would make a lot of sense for Metroid Prime to have kind of come out in between Mario Kart and Donkey Kong Bonanza, or between Donkey Kong Bonanza and Kirby Air Riders. Something that would just be more of a mature game earlier, close to the launch date. Right, so let's see. What I'm gonna have to do here is go back here to the first page of Video Games Chronicles, which my internet's not going great. And then I'm going to select several articles. Which, yeah. Metroid Prime 4 was the most recent one. So, it's possible that these other articles were opened in tabs just out of order, but it will just be easier to do this. They say the definition of insanity is trying the same thing and expecting different results, and yet I am not spending any energy to try and fix my macros that are opening up the news, even though it is fairly consistently for the past week or so failed to be 100% correct in how it should be opening the news articles. I have plans and ideas, certainly when I build my new computer, which I'm dragging my feet to actually start doing that. that will fix my macros completely, rewrite them in completely different software and in a completely different way. And the hope is by basically starting over from scratch, I can eliminate using UI Vision as an extension completely, and then just have GreaseMonkey as an extension injecting JavaScript into certain pages. But that is going to take a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy, and I don't have really. I have time, I just don't have energy, and I'm not prioritizing doing it on my Windows computer when I know Windows 10 support ends in October 14th. And yeah, at which point I think I'm just gonna have to let my computer go to Windows 11 and upgrade it. Whether I built a new computer or not, I'm just gonna have to let it upgrade to Windows 11. Which that's gonna suck, but it'll be my own darn fault for playing way too much PC Building Simulator instead of clearing and decluttering my house enough to build a new PC, to install a new PC, to then get back to setting up a new PC. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection adds the lowest rated game in the franchise history, Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero, and Mortal Kombat Special Forces join the roster. I don't know what Special Forces is. Mythology Sub-Zero as a concept is interesting to me. Perhaps it wasn't interesting to people who actually were fans of Mortal Kombat at the time, but it also was just not implemented particularly well. But yeah, I don't even know what Special Forces. While both games have retained a cult following in the Mortal Kombat communities, Mortal Kombat Special Forces was met with brutal reviews at the time of release. It holds a 28 on Metacritic. I'd really like to see some gameplay footage of what Special Forces looked like and how it played. Mythology Sub-Zero was a side-scrolling beat-em-up platforming game, so it was an entirely different genre, which now with Mortal Kombat, if you are gonna ever catch a new audience, I think some kind of spin-off game in the Mortal Kombat series makes some sense. And Injustice obviously is an example of that, but yeah, I think there is probably a decision that needs to be made as far as, is Mortal Kombat going to be a highly technical fighting game that would be played at things like EVO, or is it Mortal Kombat going to be a fun button mashing game for regular people? I think the idea is it's probably supposed to be a fun button mashing game for regular people, so at some point then you should probably have a spin-off series that is the highly technical version of Mortal Kombat, that it has a different feel to it and a different theme to it overall. And typically in fighting games you'll see a spin-off game where it's like maybe more of a silly experience where all the female characters are fighting only female characters, and that can go a little bit more lewd. You've seen that in a few of the Japanese fighting games too, although I would suspect Mortal Kombat would not go in that direction. Yeah, Mortal Kombat is kind of the epiphany of the problem of Western sentimentality, in that it's perfectly fine to rip the chest off of a lady, but you better rip the skin and nipple off that chest too, and only show gory, bloody muscle, because if they showed one bit of skin, that would be considered obscene. at a certain level, I think they did put Pinhead, which really his name is Hellpriest, but only Hellraiser fans would know that. But yeah, I think they did have Pinhead as a DLC character in Mortal Kombat series, but something like that to take the gore and brutality even further might be necessary to just even make Mortal Kombat feel like it's shocking. See, and I could see making a highly technical spin-off of Mortal Kombat that just got rid of fatalities and got rid of a lot of the flash and a lot of the gore. Yeah, maybe you would spin it off and call it Immortal Kombat. I am Mortal Kombat, and then say all the characters are immortal and cannot die, and this is what happens to people when they win the Mortal Kombat tournament, or something, and then you could remove all the blood and all the gore and just have a fighting game with the similar move sets, but much faster without fatality cutscenes and stuff like that. They wanted to do in Mortal Kombat Mythologies, as I wrap up here, a mythologies for all of the main characters of Mortal Kombat, but then they started with Sub-Zero, who was probably the most popular one, and it still didn't work that well. So the idea that there would have been a Mythologies Jax, or Drax, I think was another character, or Baraka, I think was another character. Yeah, that's less likely to have ever really happened. Moving on, Elden Ring on the Switch 2 apparently drops to 15 frames per second in handheld mode, it's been claimed. I can't recommend you playing the Elden Ring on Switch in this state, says one journalist. Which, yeah, that is already really bad news for the Switch 2. But perhaps not particularly surprising. The Nintendo Switch 2's hardware is not brand new hardware just because it's being sold as a new product. It is very old chipsets, it's very old technology. It is barely better than the Steam Deck OLED in hardware, and it's not really even an apples and oranges comparison there. And that's going to be true for most handheld devices, is that you're just not going to put the power of a giant game console or a gaming PC into the form factor of a handheld device and have room for a battery and have any kind of battery life in the device. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if also this is an optimization problem, but the fact that Nintendo would let a game get released in a poor state and not help the developers of Elden Ring polish their game up and make it perform says something about the new people in charge of Nintendo at this point too, that they're not really caring. Yeah, every single Nintendo and PlayStation now has also gone up in price too. So you're getting less and paying more for it, it feels like these days. Moving on, the setting for the next Forza Horizon game has seemingly been leaked via a car company. The next Forza Horizon game has yet to be announced. So here we're seeing, I don't think this is Akihabara, but this is one of those neighborhoods in Japan where there are storefronts and many floors on the storefronts, each floor possibly selling something different, moving up to the top floor, which is usually selling something of an adult nature. And they are just covered in billboards. So I'm not really sure which billboard I'm supposed to be looking at here as far as it's an Instagram post. Let's see. Exciting news. We have Cody here from Verizon official shooting cars for the next installation in the ceiling. As there is no late model K cars in America, he has flown out from the States to use our cars as a basis for their digital versions. Okay. So yeah, that information leaked. And so this image here may be a stock image that has nothing to do with that at all. Yeah. Don't really see anything on these posters that would indicate anything at all. Yeah, this is Akihabara. I think this must be a small strip of it, although it's probably not that big. And Akihabara, Akihabara have become much more of a tourist trap, so it's not really the best place you would want to go to try and get electronics in Japan. You might check there, but I think there are better places. Moving on, the Mega Victory Bell announced for Pokemon Legends ZA. It joins Mega Dragonite in the latest new Mega form debuting for Pokemon Legends ZA. They've used a screenshot here in which somebody has already memed this Mega Victory Bell into some kind of horror game because the image of it is horrific and frankly feels stupid. No, wait a minute, this seems to be an actual thing actually in the game. Really? So weird. This is really weird. I don't know if this is actually an official thing for Pokemon Legends ZA. I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like it should be, because this animation style barely looks right in the character designs for Legends ZA. In the animation style of the building in the color palette looks nothing like what you would expect. I mean, this is totally a horror experience. I just cannot expect that a Nintendo Pokemon game would be horrific. If this is really an official video, this is an intriguing experiment in that they are it would be an intriguing experiment in that they are trying to just take the Pokemon audience in a very different direction. I really just don't feel like you could make a Pokemon scary experience. Yeah. And so I guess it was supposed to be a bit of a joke thing at the end there, that the trainer had already trained Victory Bell and he was just making a mess. Alright, so all those logos, that was an official video. Wow. That is surprising. It's very, very surprising. I would have sworn that this would have just been some kind of fan-made project. You heard me say at the beginning here that this is probably just somebody modded in a Mega Victory Bell into some kind of horror game. Particularly from this screenshot, you don't even get any indication at all that the characters are in the world of Pokemon Legends ZA. That is shocking. But in fairness, I feel like Pokemon probably is 25 to 30 years old at least, so maybe it is time for them to go in a different direction and try something that is kind of scary. I doubt you'll have a single scary sequence like this video in the actual game, though. Because they are definitely still targeting Pokemon as being your kid's first JRPG experience. Moving on, this is probably the biggest news to most people. Hollow Knight Silksong is coming out in 2 weeks. After years of speculation, Silksong is coming out soon. We have an exact date, September 4th, 2025. So I imagine a lot of people will play it, and that will be the big game for this year. Yeah. If I was to start to think about end of the year conversations, there is basically nothing to talk about. Helldivers 2 and Marvel Rivals up until September of this year is about all that is relevant to speak on that I can recall. And then Call of Duty or Black Ops 6 Beta and Silksong will probably be end of year discussions, which it will be kind of interesting to see what Giant Bomb, now independent, does as far as an end of year thing, if they do anything. That being said, it's not like I really am subscribed to Giant Bomb and watching any of their content, so I would have to go out of my way to check. The Metal Gear Solid 3 remake includes a mini game made by Platinum. Platinum Games has developed a remake of the hidden Metal Gear Solid demo. Would that be Metal Gear Solid 1 or Metal Gear Solid Guy Savage demo? The Guy Savage demo was an Easter egg in the original PS2 game. This basic hack and slash game was written and directed by Konami veteran Shuyo Murata. Murata would later serve as an uncredited co-director on Metal Gear Solid 4. Interesting. But I don't know if that really means much. Either it's just going to be this hidden Easter egg made by Platinum Games, which Platinum Games at this point has not really proven to me to be an interesting company, as they've lost most of their talent and they've squandered Bayonetta, and maybe the new Ninja Gaiden game will catch my attention, but maybe not. Bungie CEO Pete Parsons is leaving after a decade, nearly a decade. Justin Truman will take over as the new CEO. Yeah. Let's see, after more than 2 decades, it says, of helping build this incredible studio. So was it a decade or after a decade? It says almost a decade after more than 2 decades. There's a real disconnect there from what is being said. Maybe he worked at Bungie, then he left Bungie, and now he was back for almost another decade. Really, though, I guess if I was to think about the last 10 years or so at Bungie, though, I don't think that that has been the best years of Bungie. You might have been 10 years ago at the peak intel of Bungie making Halo games that were actually somewhat interesting. But I don't know. I don't know how many people even consider themselves Halo fans these days. And I don't know if Halo fans would really just say Halo 1, Halo 2, and maybe Halo 3 were good, and everything after Halo 3 was probably not considered good. So yeah, Bungie definitely could use some new leadership, but there's no guarantee that new leadership would be better leadership. For all we know, the new person stepping up will do exactly the same as the old person, or will do even worse. Let's see. Pokemon Team's Rocket Moltres Ultra Rare Premium Collection is coming in November. Each Moltres promo will include a Destined Rival stamp. This is Video Games Chronicle talking about the actual card game, which is not video game news. Then the Division 2 Survivors has been announced, coming in 2026. Survivors is described as a survival extraction experience. I heavily question whether any game that has described itself as an extraction game has been good. I'm trying to think. Like, first of all, they're not really my style of games anyway, so the running around and gunning with multiple players, it's not my style of games. But yeah, getting something and then being extracted out feels like it is just a way of trying to make your game feel a little different and perhaps control the amount of time each round goes as far as these multiplayer games, instead of just having an arbitrary timer or something like Fortnite where the arena gets smaller and smaller, which I guess that's what they really are just trying to avoid, is the comparisons to something like Fortnite. The Division, I believe, as a series, started off as somewhat of a single player experience, and now it definitely feels like they are trying to pivot it into more of a game as a service experience. And yeah, there might be a problem certainly also with the idea of there being a secret group of militaristic, like secret police effectively, that are sleeper cell agents until they are activated. Now supposedly, I guess, defending the United States after a terrorist attack, which is I think what the Division is about. But yeah, in modern times, the idea of a non-badge wearing police force of secret police who have no accountability and were totally established in secret has a lot different connotations than it may have had when the first Division game came out. Alright, and that's going to bring us to Komatsu articles, and I'm going to take this opportunity to take a little bit of a bathroom break, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. We may very well end up having to reopen all the Gematsu articles too, because I only see about 5 of them open at the moment. So it looks like, let me just scroll around here and see what happened. Yeah, everything is all over the place today as far as articles. We're going to be going through Gematsu articles and then games that came out on Steam, and it's just all going to be mixed. I'm just going to have to hope everything happened. Yeah, I assume my macros even finished running. I didn't even check that. Yeah. But yeah. Something is definitely messed up there. Alright, well, we'll start with this. King of Meat is a game that launches on October 7th on PS5, Xbox Series, and PC in early 2026 for Switch. Okay, I would assume it kind of has that vibe of something like a Rick and Morty Cartoon Network cartoon. We'll see what it actually looks like it's gonna play as. So it seems like the weird thing about these kinds of animation styles is they never really match the Unity Unreal asset flip feel that you tend to see. So yeah, this is just like a co-op dungeon runner platforming game, which I'm not sure I've seen a single version of a game like this that has really worked, because the problem here is you have a frustration platformer style of gameplay, then you're trying to convince 4 people to work together. Usually what it is you will see it be more of a drop in, drop out, up to 100 random people all running the same dungeon and laughing at random strangers when they fail. There is certainly something about this game that it has the ability to create your own dungeons and share them online. So yeah, the game though is giving you, I think, 100 official dungeons and then expecting the community to make their own fun after that point. Yeah, there's nothing visually consistent or thematically consistent in this. This character's supposed to be crazy. Yeah. It kind of felt like a Rick and Morty type looking animation style in the trailer, but then that's just like not what the actual game is, and it doesn't really have anything that feels like great writing around it, and the gameplay in itself has limited appeal. Sony Interactive Entertainment has sold its stake in Evo to Nodwin Gaming, the PlayStation manufacturer, to transition to a global sponsor of the tournament instead. Interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if this is maybe Sony just getting out while the getting is good, but it also probably highlights how Sony really doesn't think of fighting games as something that it should be that invested in, which in fairness, it's not like Sony has a first party title fighting game that it releases a new version of every couple of years. And while they did recently announce a Sony official fight stick, which weirdly people have already stopped talking about that before I think it even really came out. Yeah. Let's see if we can find the flex stick. I think might be what it was called. But yeah, this perhaps highlights the craziness that is what's going on internally at Sony, is that they don't have a consistent thought. See, I don't even know if this is the new fight stick that they announced, or if the flex stick is actually an older fight stick from Sony, because this is under the PS5. Well, I guess not. Yeah, this might be an older one. No. This is the new one because it's the Marvel Tokon game. So yeah, Sony is not being an official owner of Evo, or having a stake of ownership in Evo, to be more accurate, might have something to do with the fact of Marvel Tokon and this fight stick, is that they maybe didn't want an impropriety to show up, and they didn't want to have this internal conflict where Sony was going to probably push that everybody wins flex sticks or everybody fights on flex sticks. But yeah, there really is only one interesting thing about this fight stick, and it is that there is a no tool restrictor on the back to change the gate, which that's kind of nice to just on the fly from the back be able to change it. But everything else is pretty standard. Maybe not every fight stick has built-in storage. So we certainly will want to keep an eye out for Evo. Not that I really follow Evo coverage, but we would want to keep an eye out to see if there is a big push around this flex stick. When Evo happens, or whether they completely just don't mention it at all. The fact that this can fit in a backpack is interesting, because it makes me wonder if this flex stick is actually somewhat smaller than your average fight stick. But yeah, all you can do is register for updates at the moment. And the advertisement here is pushing the PlayStation 4 still, which I wouldn't be surprised if there is a lot of PlayStation 4 games being played at Evo instead of PlayStation 5 versions of the games. If, you know. Although I kind of expect Evo to be heavily PC. It might not be PC at all. Satisfactory is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series on November 4th, currently available for PC. Yeah. And at this point we're going to just ignore that, and we're going to be jumping around everywhere. A 3D pixel art co-op adventure, Wildkin, has been announced for Xbox One and Series and PC. I think at some point here we're going to stop seeing games get announced for the Xbox One. It would be very much apples to oranges comparison, but it would be interesting to see what the dropping of support of the Xbox One would be compared to the dropping support of the Nintendo Switch One, and where Xbox One performance might line up compared to the Nintendo Switch 2. Dome Keeper is set for full online and local multiplayer with a new trailer. This is Gaming on Linux article, and here is one of the GodotCon presentations. I've tried to sit through several of them, but it really is just somebody standing in front of a camera and talking, and so it's not very visually attractive to watch, and it is very much technical and dry things. But yeah, multiplayer does work to some extent in Godot projects, which I wasn't 100% sure that it really does work, but it does seem to work to some extent. We've yet to see any major AAA game use Godot, and when you start to think about like a AAA fighting game or something using Godot, the multiplayer may not be good enough. It may not be rollback netcode as polished as possible. And we're just gonna ignore all of these. Yeah. So yeah, I just guess I don't know what happened here. Things just got past where it should have been. Robo Frenzy adds an Xbox Series and Switch versions launching in 2026. It is a game I have not seen, I guess. 7 years later, Valve's Proton has been an incredible game changer for Linux. It's been 7 years since Valve revealed Proton, their compatibility layer to run Windows games on the Linux system. What an incredible time it has been. It definitely doesn't feel like 7 years to me, because I basically have only had my Steam Deck for probably about 2 years, and I think the Steam Deck itself has probably only been out for 3 or 4 years, so they worked on it for several years before they even felt comfortable enough to come out with the first Steam Decks. Hard to imagine Linux gaming without Proton now, isn't it? Unless games have some kind of funky video codecs or kernel level anti-cheat, a lot of the time they do just work with a click of a button. We went from getting a handful of indie games and some AAA scraps from porting companies to multiple tens of thousands of games, and we're spoiled for choice on what to actually play. Going by ProtonDB, there's at least 15,855 games rated playable by at least 2 reports, and Valve's Deck Verified system shows 21,694 games rated as at least playable for SteamOS and Steam Deck, which, notice the gap there, in that SteamOS and Steam Deck have surpassed just using Proton separately. So yeah, a lot has changed in 7 years. Yeah, a lot has changed, and there's an expectation and a desire certainly for a lot more to improve and change in the next 7 years, and frankly less than the next 7 years. We're expecting, particularly with Windows 11, debacles happening left and right, to see significantly more people willing to try something like SteamOS and be able to live with something like SteamOS compared to 7 years ago, where trying to get somebody to install Ubuntu or Linux Mint was literally an impossible task. It would be like trying to convince somebody to chop off their own arm. And we have to thank not just Microsoft for screwing up, we also have to thank Apple for screwing up too consistently, in that if Apple had ever cared one bit about games and not actively been trying to fight with Fortnite for the past 7 years, Apple definitely could have come out with some kind of iPhone-like game console that would have really won over a lot of market shares, because a lot of Apple fanboys would have believed it would have just worked out of the box and that it would have just played games perfectly. And Apple did try that a little bit with Apple TV, but Apple TV barely had maybe a few dozen games on it, or even now I think only has a few dozen games on it, and definitely the Apple TV is not a game system in any way. Yeah, the it just works mentality, which is mostly a lie, really, is something that still gets sold pretty well to Apple fanboys. And we, of course, have to point out that Proton's functionality and use started to skyrocket because of the Steam Deck, and the Steam Deck only really exists because the Nintendo Switch proved that a handheld device in that form factor can be popular, whereas the Wii U kind of made the exact opposite argument. We had not had a really big screen handheld device before that point. So if you were thinking a handheld device that had buttons built in and a screen on it, you would have been thinking the Game Boy Advanced or the Game Boy more than you would be thinking the giant screen of the Switch. Even the 2DS or 3DS screens are still very small combined versus the Switch's screen. See, so we had heard that the person in charge of Cloud Chamber was replaced. Now we have a GameDeveloper.com article saying 2K is reducing the size of Bioshock 4 developer Cloud Chamber. 2K president David Ismailer shared the news in a memo to staff with former Diablo boss Rod Ferguson, while former Diablo boss Rod Ferguson is now head of the studio. So this probably is a somewhat cleaning of house to just getting rid of people who were either problems or were loyalists to the previous leadership. I would hate to think that it's just internal politics and that there isn't an actual desire here to just create the best team to actually make Bioshock 4 the best game it can be. But yeah, we shall see. I don't think that there was any real indication that there was even going to be a Bioshock 3 until Bioshock 3 was announced. So had Bioshock 2 just come out and they had stayed silent, and then a surprise announcement and then quick release of Bioshock Infinite had come out, that would have been a much better experience. And following that logic down to the next step, I feel like they've announced the Bioshock 4 way too early, and then there is just no hope here that Bioshock 4 is actually going to be that interesting if it ever comes out and doesn't just get cancelled or stay in development hell forever. And here they're using an image from Bioshock 4 where it says no jobs today in the back as kind of a cheeky screenshot of them laying off people effectively, which is perhaps making light of a more serious situation. Let's see, and then we're just again going to go through some games here. This is macro still running. No, it doesn't seem like it is. Game developer Gamatsu says the Indian action-adventure game Son of Thanjai has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, which I don't know if that's based off of any kind of Indian folklore story or not. Cracking the Cryptic had a Sudoku variant puzzle series based off of one of the Middle Eastern stories in myths, and then it seemed to be fairly popular as their monthly new content for Patreon people. And then one of their Patreon supporters said that he'd love to get on stream and talk to him about it, but they can't because the country he lives in, of which the story is from, has such tight restrictions as far as using the internet and censorship and such. I don't even know if it was actually he wanted to get on and talk about it, or if it was he wanted to actually solve the puzzles and play the puzzles, which that is unfortunately a sad truth, is that many of the Middle Eastern countries are destroying their own culture. Anything that would be pre-Islam is considered anti-Islamic in many Middle Eastern countries, and statues and cultural stories and everything are being eradicated as much as possible. Okay, well that came out of nowhere. Yeah. Well, that is an interesting teaser, certainly, in that you had this kind of calm, not particularly quadruple A level of graphics being shown here, of this like king, prince, or celebrity, one would assume. The graphics look good, but when you get into the actual visuals of the humans, it's a little rough. And then it jumps to being some kind of hint at like a God of War. Now notice that some of these horns in the background are black and some are silver, and it seems to be a reflection issue. See how that zooms in and it just turns black there. And so then you have just like a completely different game, and that whip looks terrible. So it's like those last few seconds there feel like they are the real game, and everything up into that feels like some kind of cutscene. Cinematic action adventure epic. I do think I have to applaud it for not going Bollywood, though. Like, there's always that fear in my mind that any game made in India, which, let's admit it, that so far there hasn't been much of a gaming industry in India. It's brand new, fresh little baby of an industry. Uh, but yeah, there is definitely a fear that any game made in India is going to just fall into a stereotypical Bollywood thing, and there's just going to be a ridiculous dance number and ridiculous action effects come out of nowhere. And in video games, you can go pretty ridiculous as far as action effects, but you can't go Bollywood levels of ridiculousness. Yeah, this does certainly intrigue me. But yeah, it does definitely also feel like this is just going to be a God of War clone, which is fine because God of War now is not really like the old God of War games, and I don't think the new God of War games are going to be able to go too far. I think that series has perhaps realized that it's going to best simmer and just be on the back burner for 5 to 10 years before they try to reboot the series. Let's see. Gaming on Linux says leaks again hint at Valve doing a proper Steam Machine console. We are again seeing leaks of a future potential console from Valve, which is exciting considering how well the Steam Deck has done. Valve is always working on something though, and seeing leaks doesn't mean they're currently working on what they're currently working on will ever actually be released. Yeah. As reported by Sadly It's Dadly on X, noting that a Geekbench result has appeared for Valve Fremont. Going by the details, it's currently using a Hawk.2 CPU, noted as the AMD custom CPU 1772, featuring 6 cores and 12 threads, running at 3.20 gigahertz, which is not really that fast for something that you could plug into a wall. So that this is probably budget conscious. It's running Windows 11 Pro, or at least it's claiming that, and it has a dedicated Radeon RX 7600 GPU, which I don't think is perhaps the best GPU you could possibly have. So it's not doing a Strix Halo thing, which I would heavily suspect that if they are actually going to come out with a console, it would be more of a Strix Halo type build, but maybe there's a price reason why they don't want to go in that direction, where the Strix Halo designs so far have all required that the RAM be soldered onto the motherboard and it have a APU. The Fremont does have an APU, but then it also has a dedicated GPU. Of course, anybody could change what their computer reports back to Geekbench, so it's possible that this is just somebody goofing around and hacking effectively Geekbench. While a Steam Deck console wouldn't need a screen built in and a battery built in, it almost certainly would need to come with some kind of controller. Steam Deck controller by default. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a $60 or $70 increase in price to buy a Steam console like Fremont with a controller, and then months down the line they might sell you a refurbed one without a controller, or start selling them without controllers overall. Of course, right now with tariffs, it's kind of crazy to think that Valve would come out with anything new. But yeah, still would need a controller. You'd have to plug it into a TV, obviously, so the cost of a TV maybe should go into that a little bit. But if you are plugging it into a TV, there is a bit of an expectation that it would look good, at least upscaling the 4K or having the TV upscale to 4K. So yeah, it would be weird if they went really expensive and then you had this game console that was $900 plugging to a TV, and yeah. There's not really too much to take away from this, other than obviously they're working on it, and it's good that they're working on it, but if a product like this ever comes out at all, it could come out next week, or it could come out 10 years from now, and they could just always be working on it. I don't like 6 cores in general. I would prefer you either go with 4 cores, 8 threads, or bump up to doubling factors and going 8 cores, 16 threads. And I definitely don't like less than 4 gigahertz of processing power. No mention in this article about how much RAM it would have. RAM and RAM speed, I think, would play a much bigger role, and no mention as far as how fast or how much internal storage it would have, too. It would be interesting to know if it was going to potentially support an external PCI Express connection or a Thunderbolt connection, where you could put an external graphics card into a console and bump it up. Because if you could do that, and you had a decent CPU to balance with that and enough RAM, then there would be an upgrade path where you might pay a little bit more for a Fremont console instead of buying a pre-built PC, and then there would be a path forward for external graphics cards, perhaps official external graphics cards, to be plugged into a Fremont to bump it up to higher resolutions. Which that technology of Thunderbolt and external graphics cards is something that's been around for a couple of years now, but has yet to be really engaged with, and really needs to be optimized fairly well too. Let's see. Moving on, Unknown Worlds has filed a lawsuit against the ousted founders for allegedly downloading 170,000 confidential files. After filing a lawsuit against Crafton, Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and Ted McGill are now being sued. Or more realistically, I think this is just a retaliatory suit for purportedly making off with reams of confidential information, including business records, intellectual property, and more. At a certain point, I think this is Unknown Worlds admitting that they are collecting and securing evidence in the upcoming trial, and maybe they are doing it in the wrong way, and maybe that evidence will get thrown out for not being acquired in a legal way. The legal way to do this would be to file a lawsuit and then in that subpoena and lawsuit require that all information be kept and not deleted, and at best maybe you could keep some metadata or testimony from these people who said, we've seen that these files existed, we know these files existed, they deleted or refused to turn over these files via the subpoena and the discovery process. But I think that's probably as far as you can go legally if a lawyer was going to advise you. I don't think a lawyer is going to advise you you should back up all of the data you can have now for the discovery process that hasn't even started yet. But yep, this definitely feels like Unknown Worlds is the bad guy here, which that seems to be the narrative that's growing, and that they are suing somebody for probably keeping information for a future lawsuit. That would be my assumption. Now, if it wasn't the case that they were perhaps in the wrong way keeping information for a future lawsuit and were instead just stealing intellectual property to go and start their own business, well, then, yeah, that would be a very different experience. This lawsuit has already gotten nasty, and it seems like it's going to move somewhat fast too, which is definitely probably not good for justice, but it is very good for storytelling narrative that is wanted in most news reporting. Let's see, a game called Town of Zoz has a Gamescom 2025 trailer. Okay. So we are getting some more games being announced through Gamescom. So this seems like this has a very Mexican, Central American feel to it. The announcer has that kind of accent. The visuals have that style. So seems like it's a partial cooking Stardew Valley game with also dungeon crawling, which this whole genre has just really grown. There's a lot of games now going down that path of it's part Stardew Valley, it's part dungeon crawler, it's part sometimes cooking, sometimes dating, sometimes both. Yeah, this one does feel like it might have a different aesthetic and theme to it, so there's something interesting about that. Of course, I played Battleship Brigade a while ago, and it's not one of the more like this games that is being recommended, but it definitely should be. And the real experience in Battleship Brigade was just not particularly great. The cooking mechanic wasn't great, the story was pretty generic, the amount of levels was small, the level design was very small. It really suffered in several different ways. See, Gaming on Linux says the Mesa 25.2.1 has been released for open source Linux graphics drivers. A lot of technical things being upgraded. Let's see, 25.8.27 is the last planned 25.1.x release. That's this one. And then the latest 25.2.4 is coming out October 1st. Yeah. It'll be a while, I imagine, before they get to 26 version. I'm still coughing every now and then, but it only gets bad really when I am talking a lot for a very long amount of time. Although I was also playing PC Building Simulator yesterday, and after 2 or 3 episodes, I was getting really uncomfortable in my chair, just starting to hurt my back and things like that. So too much sitting may be also a problem. Moving on from GameDeveloper.com, Microsoft says the next Xbox will have AI-powered features that will transform gameplay. Microsoft will start experimenting with these AI-powered features on the upcoming ROG Xbox Ally X device. This was coming from some of, I believe, the Vice President, Jason Ronald. So this may be Jason Ronald's push into trying to look like he's the next person to be in charge of Microsoft, which may very well be the case. Promoting AI like crazy for the moment, at least. So, yep, it would be interesting if the Xbox ROG Ally convinced people to buy it in the first place, and then people found it was a good experience to play Windows gaming on handheld, and then the AI snuck its way into people's lives here. Now, I find it interesting that in this screenshot, as a publicity shoot, you would have somebody wearing headphones when there's some pretty nice looking speaker grills for the device too. Although it is also kind of interesting to have somebody have food and drink in front of them, and then they're playing the menu of the ROG Xbox Ally. Obviously this would have been edited in later, and the model was just looking at a black screen, I'm sure. But yeah, the idea of picking up your game console, then putting it down, and then eating, and then picking it back up, I guess is pretty normal, but it feels like it is something that's going to lead to greasy hands on the screen. I guess maybe I just have instilled in me an old school mentality of washing your hands before and after every meal. Although, in fairness, if I started to really pay attention, I probably don't do that consistently. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Dave, a nice guy, might be a game of interest. The girl from Arcania might be something. Jump Space launches in early access on September 19th. It's a mission-based cooperative first-person shooter. Everybody made a YouTube short on that. Paradox has announced the updated and expanded and remastered Surviving Mars relaunched. I believe this was the game I tried to play, and I could not even get through the tutorial of it. In that, if this is the game that I tried to play, it looked like it was a fine kind of simulation survival game, but yeah, the gameplay mechanics really just did not catch my attention. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is that game. Yeah. Really, I would say it was more me that was the problem than Surviving Mars. And that I was just not willing to get into that style of gameplay. And it taught me certainly a lesson to be cautious about what kind of games I do want to play, because these colony sim city builder games are not for me. And that's been true for other city builders too. It's not just, it's colonies make it even worse, because it's even tighter on resources, but yeah. Simulation games in general are not really what I'm looking for, but it's going to heavily depend on what the simulation is. Obviously, I've been spending over 70 hours now playing PC Building Simulator, and I can play that just fine because I actually do kind of like the idea of building PCs, whereas I am completely ambivalent about the idea of running a city. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com says DevCom is going to rebrand as Gamescom Dev. We aim to create greater synergies with our other Gamescom formats. Okay. Seems like a very inside baseball simplistic name change. Let's see. That looks good. That might be good. Trails of the Sky first chapter adds Switch 2 version. A prologue demo is now available for the PS5, Switch, and PC. It's one of these announcements where they want to announce two different things at the same time. So, I guess you can download the demo now if you wanted to. A story-based strategy game, Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown, announced, which is interesting how as more and more new Star Trek comes out, the older Star Trek gets remembered more fondly. Same is true for Star Wars. People hated the prequels when they first came out. Now, in comparison to newer content which people hate, there is a nostalgia for the prequels that was not there originally. For the most part, people hated Voyager when it came out. It was set very much in a different quadrant of the galaxy. It was a Federation crew that was only half Federation members and then half Maquis from Deep Space Nine, rebels. It was a desperate struggle to get home story, so there was a lot more of compromised morals, or at least a lot more talk of compromising morals. This is coming from Daedalic, which is, first of all, a bit of a red flag, and then from the looks of it, it looks like it is going to be very much just like Fallout Shelter, as Fallout Shelter might be now. One would hope that it's more than just running and managing the rooms inside of the Voyager. But the part that is actually shown as far as the gameplay, there's very little. Basically, this is what I think the actual gameplay is. It's just this section here, and then all of this could be cutscenes in between that. The actual Steam page seems to give a bit more of a general idea of what it's going to be, and it definitely feels like it's a game that was being considered to be released on mobile, even though it doesn't seem like it actually is being released on mobile. It's being published by Daedalic, which last I heard Tencent had a controlling share in Daedalic, being made by Game Excite, which I don't know about that company. Don't know anything about that company. So you would think something like that might be announced more at a Comic-Con or a Sci-Fi Con or a specific Star Trek convention, not at Gamescom. but who knows? Maybe there'll be more footage of the actual game. You look at a screen like this and it feels like this is a game that would have been made 20 years ago, though. It does not feel like a modern game for modern console hardware or PCs. Let's see. Moving on, we have a GameDeveloper.com article that says Frost Giant CEO Tim Morton says some layoffs are possible after Stormgate underperforms. The real-time strategy title currently has fewer concurrent players at launch than it did during early access. Yeah, and I really haven't even heard anything about Stormgate. We have a virtual skate game. Is this VR? Yes, it is. So I'll check that. Do I think Rusty's Adventures came with highlighting? No, I don't. Whoops. Well, that was a mess. We got jumped all over the place here. Valheim is in early access in 2021. Is it coming out of early access? I don't know. Breakers Unlock the World title has been changed to Limit Zero Breakers and launches in 2026 worldwide. Okay, that does sound like a more English title, but I question if there's really a need to have a more rememberable title, or if Breakers Unlock the World is more memorable than Limit Zero Breakers. Both are still pretty much titles that feel like they're being translated from Japanese to English. So they probably should have just stuck with Breakers Unlock the World, if I guess. But maybe there's a reason, copyright reason, why I couldn't have that title worldwide. And then Valheim Call to Arms, that's why Valheim was opened. Major update announced with new combat mechanics and lots of new items. But it's still considered early access. Right. GameDeveloper.com says Hollow Knight Silksong gets a release date after 7 years of being in development, which I guess gives some small hope for every other game that's been in development that long. Bat and Ball doesn't look like anything interesting. Here's a game called Kill the Music that is a provocative title, at least. Gear Club Unlimited 3 has been announced for modern consoles and PC. Is it Gear.Club? I guess it is. There's a period in the logo also. One assumes that this is a racing game. Which honestly, there's a lot of racing games that get announced, but there's not really that much talk about racing games, or I don't see people actually playing racing games for the people that I follow on YouTube and that YouTube recommends to me, which YouTube's algorithm is terrible about recommending anybody new to me at all. Moving on, Gaming on Link says Soul Blaze is a new dice rolling creature collecting roguelike you can try now. Roguelite you can try now. Okay, there might be something to that game. Tencent claims that its new AI tool will reduce art production timeframes from days to minutes. VisVise is billed as an end-to-end AI game creation suite that will massively accelerate workflows with, quote, human oversight. Which, yeah, I would question if some of this is puffery, and there's still going to be a heavy question as far as just what data is this AI tool really trained on? Because Tencent, being a Chinese company, I wouldn't be surprised if it's trained on a lot of copyrighted data, and then there are going to be people that use something like VizViz, and then all of a sudden have people claiming that they stole their copyrighted work, and they may very well have done it without knowing it. We just had problems of tracing / plagiarism in Pokemon TCG Pocket, where somebody literally, just a human, stole someone else's work. It's only going to be multiplied by 1,000-fold when you start using AI that is trained on stolen art from potentially everybody on the internet. Let's see, we have a game called Dino Rocks here. Does this look interesting enough? I'm gonna say no. Midnight Murder Maze. It's gonna be a no. A turn-based roguelike brick breaker called Kill the Brick Man has been announced for the Xbox One and Series and PC. It is now available. You can also see it's already mixed. Yeah. Obviously there's something people don't like about it. Interesting game with some fun game loops, a bit buggy and unbalanced at the moment. Be worth a recommendation. Piston will often just miss its primary mechanic, wasting bullets, and to my understanding, Chapter 4 level 8 is just impossible to beat. Okay, so it seems to have some bugginess problems. You can help get more noticed with the Game Devs of Color support bundle on itch.io, which I would assume is just a bundle of games from developers of color by the title there. That was from Gaming on Linux. Here we have a very simplistic ant simulator game. Let's see. Hikamatsu has the Famitsu sales from the 4th to the 17th updated a second time. 2 weeks of sales numbers instead of 1 week for some reason. Software sales numbers, though, not going particularly high. So for the, let's see. The original, it was just 1 through 10 showing all Nintendo Switch things selling. It looks like they maybe updated it to the top 30 showing mostly Nintendo Switch things. And as far as new things, the newest game was Fantasy Life I on the 19th. Almost feels like maybe this was a holiday in Japan, and that's why they have 2 weeks of sales numbers. But it really is just the same old story. Nintendo sales are dominating, and maybe sales overall might be going down. As far as new games, in that time frame, not much has happened. And hardware, Switch sales are dominating. Famitsu is on a dangerous precipice in which their sales numbers, while they will always be useful, may lose relevancy as they don't include PC sales and as gaming sales overall start to go down. Dome Keeper. No, not why. We have Dome Keeper open here. It doesn't seem like there was a new update. Yes, there was. Multiplayer update apparently was added to the game. Bloodstorm Alien Purge. Looks like it might be something. Void Icarus. I'll give it a chance. Pokemon Legends Z-A revealed the Mega Victory Bell. And yeah, almost in contrast to that horror video, here's what the regular video is. Just notice the completely different visuals and the completely different color palette that exists. Now, why would you Mega Evolve a Victory Bell, by the way, going after a low-level Butterfree? Yeah, you have this Victory Bell just attacking fairly low-level looking Pokemon. And attacking 3 at once, which is that something that's going to be more of a thing where you're attacking groups of them? Yeah. And then apparently some pre-purchase bonuses. And here we can see on Gamatsu they also have this horror version of the story, which again, the visuals there just look completely different, and it definitely feels like some completely different animation studio made this and asset flipped a bunch of horror elements. Just look at the way the walls look in the background here compared to the way the walls look in the background here. It would be perhaps interesting if you could go inside buildings in Legends ZA and find that the buildings in ZA just look way better instead of the flat wallpaper appearance that the walls have in that image. I mean, it really is just a wallpaper appearance. But I don't think that's how it's going to work in ZA. If anything, I bet you can't go into mini buildings at all. A mystery delivery game called Truckful is getting a demo next month and will be 100% Steam Deck compatible, which that is certainly confident, to say the least, to say something will be 100% Steam Deck compatible. Another game on Steam here that just looks like it's a simplistic horror game. And here we might have another simplistic horror game. Deep Rock Galactic Survivor has added an Xbox Series version. Okay. We can see it's rated very positively on Steam. The original Splitgate will live on with player-hosted matches, which I believe that was what the fandom wanted. I don't know if the fandom's particularly that big, though. But we can see, yeah, this 2019 game is rated very positively, at a very high all-time peak of 67,000. Right now, only 125 people have been playing it, which may be an indication that you can't really get onto too many servers. Of course, this is the fate of any of these games as services, free-to-play games, is that your audience starts to dry up, and even if you have a very loyal audience of a few hundred people or even a few thousand people, it's just not enough to justify the game developer to continue to support it. So I don't know why you want to day one buy into disappointment that your game will not be playable at some point in the future. And that is why I'm very much a big fan of single player games, where if I want to go back and play a single player game, usually nothing is there to stop me to go back and play a single player game. I don't think this one really supports English. Anyways, it looks like a generic visual novel. Directive 8020, a Dark Pictures game delayed to 2026, 13 minutes of prologue gameplay. Yeah. I suspect Directive 8020 still might be a reference to the meat to fat ratio that you can get in hamburger ground beef. But yeah, might mean anything else. Actual game here seems to be some kind of like horror, Dark Pictures game like the rest of them. Mostly cinematic, cutscene, every now and then a decision having to be made and dialogue choices having to be made. Is this the same person, or is this multiple copies of people? So yeah, there's a stealth gameplay mechanic. Apparently you can't override certain doors and lock them behind. So we're waiting for the jump scare. And the jump scare shown off screen. So yeah, that's not particularly that impressive. Unfortunately, it is a case that the Dark Pictures anthology series has been really a disappointment, and perhaps the games are a little too expensive at launch in particular, and they are just telling you more narrative stories that would have been better probably as a movie series or a streaming TV series, instead of trying to add interactivity in a way that's very well probably not helpful. Let's see. Gaming on Linux also says that Hollow Knight Silksong is releasing September 4th, so at least all my news sources are in agreement. Known as Puka, doesn't look like a interesting enough game. Graveyard 404, I'm gonna say no to. GameDeveloper.com also says Hollow Knight Silksong launches September 4th. Maybe that is the problem with the macros as to why they're messing up, is that they're opening up the same link to the Steam game. Yeah, that might be it. The 4 different news sources all were pre-programmed to open up the same links to the same Steam page, which means there would be 4 Steam pages, which might confuse my macros. Honestly, I guess it doesn't really matter if I figured out what the problem is now, though, because the fix for it is not going to really even concern that. Nexus Mods has announced age verification for UK users. I would assume that is just legally required at this point. But Nexus Mod has had a recent history, certainly, of being more censorious than the users on Nexus Mod wants it to be. Let's see, Earth 10 days. Yeah, that might be something. Snowfall. I'm gonna say no to that one. Mistfall Hunter 3rd beta test for PC has been set for September. Yeah. I guess the thing here is, because everything is all mixed up, we're not going to have a good spot to take another break. So I need to take another break, and as such, I am going to just take one now. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yeah, Mistfall Hunter looks like it's alright. Let's see, Tales of Eden Midgard. And we really are going to have just, I think, a few more Gamatsu articles and then just go through the remaining of the games on Steam. And then we'll be done for today in this crazy way we've gone around there. Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection adds PlayStation spin-off games, WaveNet Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3? Yeah, and here you can see how the logo for Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero is completely different from the other Mortal Kombats. And what was this one called? Something Forces? Special Forces. It looks even more different than that. Yeah. The WaveNet one in particular is one I'd like to know more about. So the start of Mortal Kombat definitely was more focused around like Asian Kung Fu type fighters, and you had a minimal amount of American military type fighters, but then it started to feel like they were trying to go deeper and deeper in that direction, and it is kind of crazy now. Oh, so Special Forces looks like it's a shooter, top-down beat 'em up type game. But yeah, it is crazy that the modern most interesting characters that they push are an Hollywood actor and Sonya Blade, the military fighter, and maybe their kid. It is an interesting combination here. That's Sub-Zero there, of Westerners making a Kung Fu action fighting game and taking it to an extreme level of they barely showed the WaveNet Mortal Kombat 3 thing there. Honestly, this Legacy Collection is the interesting Mortal Kombat to me. Yeah. Even today, I think you'd be hard-pressed to think of for an Asian company to make a gory and horrific fighting game like Mortal Kombat was. Because, yeah, Japan was going to have gore, vivisection style limitations from their SARO rating board. You just really cannot have that at all, and so it'd all be censored out in their native country, and I don't think any other Asian country would really embrace that level of violence. It is interesting how anime kind of skirts around that sometimes, and there are some very horrific things, but in modern times the horrific things are not being shown. That would be more in the 90s era of anime, when Demon City Shinjuku or something like that. Censorship, perhaps, and self-censorship in Japan has gotten worse, and video games would be held to a different standard than anime would be held to. But yeah, I just don't think there would be any kind of Asian country that would make anything like Mortal Kombat. Meanwhile, Mortal Kombat, being made by Westerners, kind of fails to expand into the Asian fighting styles and the martial arts, in that what they are showing as far as movesets are generally just a few maybe a lot of which are made up moves, and you don't have this idea that maybe Raiden is all in the karate, but then maybe Chun Li is all in Taekwondo, or you don't really have a staff fighter that's very recognizable in the Mortal Kombat series. You don't have a big brawler character that's just really strong. I guess that's supposed to be Jax. And yeah, really, I guess we haven't seen any game that, other than maybe a MMA simulation game, that has embraced like Krav Maga and some of the newer martial arts just being arts without weapons, which yeah, staff fighting and katana, I guess technically then wouldn't meet that definition. But yeah, I still am very much unsure as to what Warner Brothers can do with Mortal Kombat or should do. This is probably the right move for now, but then I don't know what the next step is really for Mortal Kombat. I played considerably little of Mortal Kombat. I maybe played it a couple times in an arcade, and that was about it. Although weirdly, I did go to a presentation around Mortal Kombat. It was like a almost Disney on Ice, except for Mortal Kombat, and it wasn't on ice type presentation that was going around the country. I can't remember the name of it, and I have no idea how, or even if it was me that pushed the idea, but I guess Mortal Kombat had just been talked about so much in the news that my parents, or at least one of them, took me to it. And I think they took my little brother probably too, who was probably way too young to be in the Mortal Kombat. I was probably too young to be in Mortal Kombat. I don't remember much about the whole event either. It probably, if I have a vague remember of it just being kind of lame and silly, and I guess that is probably what it was. But also, I guess I'm glad those kinds of events don't exist too much these days. While that seems like that might be a interesting way to get together and meet other gamers, it really likely didn't lead to any gamers meeting new friends or making new friends, as everybody's just in the crowd watching what's on the stage. And it's not like being in a mosh pit or going to a concert where everybody is, well, I guess it might be something like that. If you go to a concert and you're just sitting next to a bunch of random strangers, there's still going to be random strangers at the end of it. I'm much happier with the idea of Gamescoms or meetups or BlizzCons than whatever those types of presentations were. The weird problem though is if I get the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, it really is going to be for my own reasons though, because I'm not going to have anything special to say at all. I could be critical from the perspective of 2025 on games that came out decades previous, which would be fairly unfair, and that's about all I can say. And I certainly am not an expert in fighting games, so my input is not even particularly valid. Clean Freak, Perfect Cook. Well, this is obviously a garbage asset flip game from the looks of it, but the idea of being a clean freak of some sort might be an interesting idea. Although, if you make a game for clean freaks, then you would have to start them in an environment that was dirty, and they wouldn't really like that. And Power Wash Simulator, I guess, already kind of ticks the box as far as Clean Freak type games, or Viscera Cleanup Details kind of ticks the box for that. And honestly, I think if you are germophobic or OCD, the last thing you should probably be doing is playing a game like Viscera Cleanup Crew or Power Wash Simulator, because that's just going to be feeding into those obsessive activities, even in a video game form, instead of you developing ways to not spend all your time into those activities. Yeah. I think the line probably is, I would assume this is one of these Chinese asset flip games. Bunch of girls stranded on the island with you in a survival game, which as a premise isn't terrible as a thought. Is to say, hey, you get to live out this kind of fantasy of being stranded on an island, therefore the females have no choice but to see you as the only male protagonist on the island. Of course, in those fantasies, nobody ever considers the fact that the females might straight up just kill the male or ostracize him completely or enslave him, and make him do all the labor. They'd probably make him do all the labor and enslave him in a non-sexy way. Moving on, Gamatsu says Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth Trilogy for PS4 has been delayed to October 28th in the West. Is that going to come with any extra censorship would be my concern. They say it's due to a manufacturing setback. Okay. So we'll have to take them on their word for the moment, at least. Little Witch Survivors. Might be something. I wouldn't put a lot of faith in it being something. Battle Royale Manager doesn't look like anything. Dreamed Away launches October 23rd. Think we may have seen this game before, but I may have just seen games similar to this. Again, this is one of those cases where you have a very different art style in the actual gameplay versus the cover art or the thumbnail art. You know, it probably wouldn't hurt if there was an actual law that said video game thumbnails must be exactly accurate to what is actually in the game. Even if it was just a cutscene in the game, that it would be a step in the right direction to say you must use an actual screenshot in the game, instead of thumbnails being allowed to be anything they want. And probably wouldn't be a law in the United States, but Steam certainly could require that. Steam has never even mentioned the idea of deceptive thumbnails to an extent that anybody would actually get punished for that. So they certainly could push in that direction. Although, in fairness, it's kind of hard to draw a line in the sand as far as what thumbnail is too deceptive. Hotel Barcelona, the game from two very artistic weirdos, has its Gamescom 2025 trailer. My concern certainly here, though, is that the two are artistic, maybe autistic weirdos are just going to feed into each other's weirdness too much. You can even see in the character here, you've got eye patch with a star, lady, fiery red hair, and then shirt open showing a bra and necklace, ribbon necklace. Which, that's a lot for one character design. It does feel like, yeah, it's from the creators of Deadly Premonition and No More Heroes. So here you have a cutscene of a guy shooting the GPS. Right. So it is some kind of weird zombie hack and slash game. So goes into a completely different gameplay style there for a second there. So it seems like you can switch between 3 personalities of the same person, maybe, or 3 different people if they are actually separate people. But it seems like maybe only one of them is around the whole time. So I don't know who any of those characters are. But yeah, this seems to be probably the real version of your protagonist. And there might be multiplayer. But notice how they say meet Justine, an agent of the law. And then most of this trailer is showing only one person who is being possessed by a killer. So the character you're playing as is being possessed by a killer. And every time you die, you seem to respawn in the hotel. So yeah, it's a lot of Deadly Premonition nonsense. Yeah. It's coming to PS5, Xbox Series, and PC on Steam and Microsoft Store on September 26th. And yeah, arguably this is one of those games where maybe day one would make some sense to play it, but also if I waited years to play it, it would probably get about the same views on YouTube, since it's going to be very much a weirdo game with a cult following at best. Even the publisher is called Cult Games. No indication of what the price is. That is certainly going to be a factor too, is that if the price is $60 versus $10, that would be a very different decision. I definitely feel like the creators of No More Heroes and Deadly Premonition, well, I do get the idea that they wanted to work together, and it's nice to see artists collab now and then. The long development time of making video games really hurts that process, and it definitely would have been better, in my opinion, if the creator of Deadly Premonition made a game, and then the creator of No More Heroes made a game, and then we would have 2 games in the same amount of time instead of just one. I'm gonna say no to Goblin Adventure. Which, on some level, I guess that is also perhaps an admission. I'm not sure I really would want to play Satisfactory at this point. It's on my wish list, but it is kind of one of these automation games that I don't think I really have the tolerance for these days. But yeah, I guess that is a weird admission that I, at some level, do buy into probably what is more of a myth than reality, that there are directors and producers who are the real creative heads of making games, and then there is just a bunch of assistant auxiliary employees who don't add anything creative or important to games. They're just doing the busy work that could be potentially replaced by AI and automation. And I don't really believe that that's the case, but that narrative gets sold because the director of a game, the manager of a game, is going to have that kind of personality where they're going to take more credit than they deserve, and corporations and the publishers and the development companies themselves are going to take more credit than they deserve by far, which if somebody is taking credit, that means somebody else is losing credit. But yeah, I don't know how to really get out of that mentality either, though, and to really have a consistent faith. This is weird that all people working on a game are contributing to some level, and are artistically contributing to some level, at least more than the main person is contributing on an artistic level. Nintendo, of course, is way worse than that, and they don't even have any real names of people who worked on Donkey Kong Bonanza to attribute any skill to. Moving on, Gamatsu says, "Buy Sweet Caroline" launches October 9th. The animated horror game dated. This was one that was being animated in a hand-drawn style. I am not sure it is actually being hand-drawn animated, which in modern times, like hand-drawn animated probably would still include using a tablet. And by hand-drawn style, I mean something that is just closer to the styles of old Disney movies, which this Western art style of animation has been almost completely lost and really needs to be brought back in things more than just a horror video game aspect. The thing, though, is that this animation styles probably don't have a lot of assistive software with them. This is clearly like the game Clock Tower, in that you're going to be playing as this vulnerable character who's going to be running around and avoiding getting killed by a whole bunch of monsters in this case. Weirdly, this might be the closest thing we have to a sequel to Alice Madness Returns. There's actually even Disney style music playing on this trailer. It seems like your protagonist now turn into a rabbit. So Bye Bye Sweet Carol definitely has an Alice in Wonderland kind of twist and feel to it. So yeah, exciting in that it might be a spiritual successor to Clock Tower, exciting by the animation style. That being said, we have to point out that I can't even remember the name of the game, and it just came out. The Microsoft game set in Louisiana that had a different kind of animation style got very little promotion and very little push, and it did not sell particularly well, I don't think. South of Midnight, I believe is the name of that game. Yeah. If Disney was smart, they would hire this company as soon as this game comes out. They would just acquire them. Of course, Disney's not really smart. And then say, we're going to have you animators make a movie for us, at least one movie for them, and try to go back to that old art style, or the feeling of that old art style. They could very easily take this old art style and just apply it to some of the newer Disney movies and re-release the movies in a different animation style. But Disney is probably dumb, so if they were going to do anything, they would take their old movies and try to release them in a newer animation style, like Sleeping Beauty, for instance, being animated like the most recent Disney Pixar movie would be a really ridiculous thing to do. Of course, Sleeping Beauty also being redone as a live action movie is a ridiculous, stupid thing to do, and they actually did that, so yeah. It's a good thing that a lot of those things are going into public domain, and that Disney is pretty much just falling apart because they can't do anything good, but they're only falling apart to a certain extent because they're still making tons of money from very expensive ticket sales of their parks and owning Marvel and Star Wars. So they bought themselves probably a decade or two in which they can just drain every dollar out of Star Wars before they give up on that. And can't make any money off of that too. And then they'll just acquire something else. Let's see, Ys 10 Proud Nordics is coming to the West in early 2026 for the Switch 2 and PC. So we're still seeing a pattern here where Switch 2 and PC first is a thing. Of course, right now the reviews are mostly negative for Ys 10 Proud Nordics, but maybe that's because it doesn't support English. Like right now there's only one review in English, and then the rest of these are all in, I assume, Japanese. So I'm gonna put this on the follow list and click my checkbox, but I don't really feel like there's a reason to make a YouTube short on a game that doesn't even support English at the moment and is mostly negative. I guess more importantly, it is mostly negative. Not a lot of reviews anyways, although it is also only been out for a couple days. So yeah. And then there's a whole different page. What were we just looking at? Ys 10 Proud Nordics. One page was that. Ys 10 Proud Nordics. Okay, there's two listings that have different app names to them. Interesting. So you'd think Steam wouldn't allow that, but it does seem like that is the case. So they just made a completely different listing for re-releasing it. And unless I'm missing something in the title. Whatever, I'll leave it at that, and I won't make a YouTube short on either one of them, just for confusing me. Purification here. Yeah, that doesn't look quite good enough. Dead End Request Code Z for PC launches August 27th. It's a roguelike RPG spin-off of the Death End Request series, which I'd have to remind myself what the Death End Request series even was. It feels like it's probably a dungeon crawler series if I was to guess. Deep Snake. Seems like it's a crazy 3D twist on the game Snake, and I'm gonna have to say no to that. It's not that interesting looking, not that well visually polished. My Hero Academia All's Justice Battle System trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. You can see this game is still coming soon. And then a ecosystem driven Petroidvania game, Good Boy, is coming to PS5, Switch 2, and PC. I don't know what a Petroid is. I guess maybe that's a pet robot, which definitely feels like that is a more difficult phrase to use instead of just saying a pet robot. Everybody talked about King of Meat. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater launch trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. We can see this game. Guess I want this on my follow list. Don't want to make a YouTube short on it. Don't think quite yet. Then I think we're almost done today, almost exactly at 3 hours. Bungie's CEO Pete Parsons steps down with Justin Truman to succeed Parsons as the new studio head. Okay. You can read the entire letter if you want on Gematsu. And then the YouTuber music group Melon Parker visual novel Melon Parker Kimi ga na Demobu no Bucho-san has been announced for PS4, Switch, PC, iOS, and Android. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly. I wonder if we're going to start seeing more of this happen, where you have groups of bands, like boy bands and girl bands from Asian countries in particular, I would suspect, have visual novels built around them. Although weirdly, this says it's a YouTuber music group, which I don't even know what a YouTuber music group would really look like. How much music can you make to be a YouTuber? You'd have to basically always be working on new songs live in public, and then always write new songs, which, yeah, that seems like that would be a lot of work to do that so publicly. Right, so again, I'm gonna have to just make a general assumption that we saw all the new games that came out on Steam. That seems like that's likely the case. I'm gonna have to make a general assumption that we saw all the news, which that seems like that's likely the case too. And that's gonna be it. So